Meet George Jetson.
If the Jetsons has always felt oddly incomplete to you, it's because the show was canceled before the story even began.
Things and stop them and start them again. Come to think of it, Spacely couldn't get along without me.
The Jetsons we watch today in endless reruns is not the series that was planned. Hanna-Barbera produced only 24 episodes before ABC pulled the plug in March 1963, making it one of the shortest-lived primetime animated series in television history. But before cancellation, and in the decades of syndication that followed, crucial footage vanished. Scenes were cut, entire plot threads were abandoned mid-season, and the show's darker vision of the future was systematically erased to make it more palatable for Saturday morning children's television. On paper, they were removing slow moments and trimming for time. In practice, they were gutting a sophisticated satire about automation anxiety and replacing it with flying car gags. That's why The Jetsons feels like it starts in the middle of a story. That's why character relationships seem to have history we never see. And that's why the show's famous optimism about the future occasionally cracks to reveal something much darker underneath. The foundation was removed, and what remained was a brightly colored shell. A show that died after one season, but became more famous in reruns than it ever was in primetime. Before we begin, I have to ask, do you remember thinking The Jetsons was as popular as the Flintstones?
Dino, get over here if you want to get in this picture.
That's okay, Fred. I'll be able to remember Dino without a picture.
Only to discover it had barely aired at all. In this video, we're going to look at what was cut, why the network abandoned the future, and how those missing scenes broke the continuity of a show that was supposed to run for years. By the end, you'll see a very different series hiding inside the 24 episodes we got. Page to screen, the space race gamble. To understand why The Jetsons was doomed from the start, we have to look at the impossible position Hanna-Barbera found itself in after the Flintstones became a phenomenon. By 1962, The Flintstones was the highest-rated show on ABC. Pulling in 40 million viewers every Friday night. The network and the studio wanted lightning to strike twice. They wanted another primetime animated sitcom that could dominate the ratings and sell millions of dollars in merchandise. The pressure was enormous. Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera pitched the obvious inverse. If the Flintstones was the past, the next show would be the future. They conceived The Jetsons as a direct mirror. The same family structure, the same domestic comedy.
With the boss coming to supper and me trying to make him think we're poor?
But George, she isn't costing us anything.
Just set 100 years forward instead of thousands of years back. George Jetson would be Fred Flintstone in a flying car. Jane would be Wilma with a robot maid. The pitch sold itself.
We expect from wiring as old as mine. Well, thanks for the chance.
But the timing was both perfect and catastrophic. In 1961, President Kennedy had announced America's commitment to landing a man on the moon by the end of the decade. The space race was the defining cultural obsession. Every magazine cover featured rockets and astronauts. World's fairs showcased visions of push-button homes and atomic-powered cars. America was drunk on technological optimism, and The Jetsons was designed to ride that wave. The problem was cost. The Flintstones worked partially because prehistoric settings were cheap to draw. Rocks, dirt, simple shapes. The future was exponentially more expensive. Every background required complex machinery, elaborate cityscapes, detailed vehicles. Hanna-Barbera's limited animation technique was already stretched thin on the Flintstones. Applying it to a show set in 2062 meant the artists had to invent an entire visual language for a world that didn't exist, then figure out how to reproduce it cheaply across 24 episodes. The production was understaffed, over budget, and behind schedule before a single frame was animated. The show was built to fail. The sponsor who killed the future. Here's where The Jetsons' fate was truly sealed. The show was sold to a single sponsor that had no idea what to do with it. Colgate-Palmolive, the soap and toothpaste company, purchased the entire first season. just as Winston's cigarettes had done with the Flintstones, but where Winston understood that adult viewers bought cigarettes, Colgate struggled to connect soap products with space-age comedy. Their solution was to make the show about housework. Colgate executives attended story meetings and pushed hard for plots that centered on Jane's domestic duties. They wanted episodes about laundry, dishes, cleaning, anything that could justify commercials for Colgate's Ajax cleanser and Fab detergent. This created a bizarre creative tension. The Jetsons was supposed to be about a world where technology had liberated humanity from labor, but the sponsor demanded that Jane still struggle with housework so they could sell soap. The writers had to invent reasons why, in 2062, laundry was still a problem. This led to the creation of Rosie the Robot.
No, that rug never had a proper cleaning.
Arguably the show's most beloved character, but also its most compromised. Rosie was designed to be a malfunctioning appliance that created more work than she solved. A walking advertisement for why humans still needed cleaning products even in the future. Original scripts featured Rosie as a more competent, almost motherly figure, but Colgate demanded she be made incompetent and comic to avoid suggesting that robots could actually replace human housework. The sponsor's interference went deeper. Colgate insisted on a Sunday night time slot, 7:30 p.m., directly opposite Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color on NBC and Dennis the Menace on CBS. This was a suicide slot. Disney owned Sunday nights. Families with color televisions, still a luxury in 1962, watched Disney to show off their new sets. The Jetsons, airing on ABC against this juggernaut, never stood a chance. By December 1962, just 3 months into its run, Colgate was already negotiating its exit. The sponsor pulled out after 24 episodes, and ABC canceled the show immediately. No other sponsor wanted to touch it. The animation crisis of 1962. The technical challenge of producing the Jetsons nearly bankrupted Hanna-Barbera's television division. While the Flintstones had proven that limited animation could work in primetime, the Jetsons pushed that technique beyond its breaking point. The problem was simple. The future required more drawings than the past. Every frame of the Jetsons needed to establish a world that audiences had never seen, and doing that with minimal animation created a show that often looked static, to the point of abstraction. The studio's solution was radical. They would recycle everything. Character models were designed to be reusable from every angle. George's work outfit appeared in almost every episode because it was cheap to reproduce. The Jetson family apartment was drawn once, in meticulous detail, and then that same background was reused in dozens of episodes with only minor alterations. The famous opening sequence, where George drops off the family at various locations,
Daughter Judy,
was animated at enormous expense, then used identically in all 24 episodes to amortize the cost. But the most extreme cost-cutting measure involved eliminating character movement almost entirely. In many scenes, characters stand completely still while only their mouths move. The camera would pan across a static image of George at his job, pressing a single button repeatedly while the dialogue carried the comedy. This wasn't just laziness, it was mathematical necessity. Hanna-Barbera calculated that they could produce a Jetsons episode for approximately $50,000 if they limited character animation to an average of 3 movements per scene. Any more movement, and the episode went over budget. This created the show's signature aesthetic almost by accident, a bright, colorful, incredibly detailed world where almost nothing moves. The backgrounds are gorgeous, packed with flying cars and elaborate machinery, but the characters inhabit them like paper dolls in a pop-up book. The stillness was supposed to be temporary, a first-season compromise that would improve once the show was renewed and budgets increased. But renewal never came, and the static style became permanent. The Googie future, designing tomorrow. The visual world of the Jetsons is one of the most influential designs in science fiction history, and it was created by a team of artists who had never worked on a futuristic project before. Production designer Walter Clinton and background supervisor Art Lazzi faced an impossible task: create a coherent vision of 2062 that would be immediately recognizable to 1962 audiences, could be reproduced cheaply across 24 episodes, and would still look futuristic decades later. Their solution was to steal from architecture. The design of the Jetsons is pure Googie, the architectural style that dominated American commercial buildings in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Named after a coffee shop in Los Angeles, Googie architecture featured upswept roofs, geometric shapes, starbursts, and boomerang curves. It was space-age optimism rendered in concrete and glass. Every bowling alley, every gas station, every diner built between 1955 and 1965 borrowed Googie elements. Clinton and Lazzi simply pushed Googie to its logical extreme. If this is what 1962 looks like when it's trying to be futuristic, what would 2062 look like? The result is a city of floating buildings held up by single pillars, a design choice that was both visually striking and economically brilliant. By elevating everything, the artists eliminated the need to draw ground-level detail. Streets, sidewalks, lower buildings, all of that expensive background work simply didn't exist in the Jetsons world. Everything floated in white space, minimizing the amount of drawing required. The famous traffic lanes of flying cars were just horizontal lines repeated at different heights. Cheap, simple, iconic. The Seattle Space Needle, which had opened in April 1962 just as the Jetsons was in development, became the visual template for almost every building in the show. That distinctive flying saucer on a stick shape appears constantly. George's office building, the shopping center, the school, all variations on the Space Needle's profile. This wasn't just aesthetic laziness. The Space Needle represented what 1962 thought the future looked like, and the Jetsons committed to that vision totally. We're halfway through our journey into Orbit City's buried secrets. If you're enjoying these excavations into the hidden history of television, please illuminate our day by clicking that like button and subscribing to Golden Flicker. We're a growing channel, and every subscription helps us keep these forgotten stories alive. Also, which classic TV show deserved more than one season? Let us know in the comments below. And now, the Golden Flicker moment. The censored scenes. Golden Flicker moment. The censored scenes. Now we reach the heart of the mystery. The original broadcasts of the Jetsons in 1962 and 1963 ran approximately 25 minutes of content per episode. But when the show entered syndication in the late 1960s and was repackaged for Saturday morning children's programming in the 1970s, those episodes were cut to 21 minutes. What was in those missing 4 minutes per episode? Across 24 episodes, that's 96 minutes of footage, nearly 2 full episodes worth of content that simply vanished. The most significant cuts involved the show's darker satirical edge. The Jetsons was originally conceived as a commentary on automation anxiety, the fear that technology would eliminate jobs and render human workers obsolete. George's job at Spacely Space Sprockets was deliberately designed to be meaningless. He pushes a button. That's it. The original scripts emphasized the existential horror of this. George is paid to do something a machine could do better, but Mr. Spacely keeps him employed out of some vague sense that humans should still work, even if work no longer means anything. Several first-season episodes featured extended scenes of George contemplating his purposelessness, staring at the button he pushes 9 hours a day, questioning why he exists. These scenes were too bleak for Saturday morning television and were systematically removed. In the episode The Coming of Astro, the original broadcast included a sequence where George, replaced temporarily by a robot, wanders the city trying to find meaning and considers jumping from his skypad. The suicide implication was edited out, leaving a jarring cut where George goes from upset to suddenly fine with no transition. The lost footage that most dramatically altered the show's continuity involves Rosie the robot. In the original broadcast version of her introduction episode, Rosie is explicitly described as an obsolete model that the Jetsons purchased secondhand because they couldn't afford a new robot. An entire subplot, running nearly 3 minutes, showed Jane shopping at a used robot lot where outdated models were being sold for scrap. This sequence established crucial character motivation. The Jetsons aren't rich, they're middle class, struggling to keep up with a society that demands constant technological upgrades.
And there is the finished model.
When this was cut, Rosie's presence made less sense, and the show's class commentary disappeared. The one-season wonder and technical sorcery. Despite the missing footage and abbreviated run, The Jetsons represents a remarkable technical achievement that changed how television thought about voice acting and sound design. The show's 24 episodes were produced in a grueling 9-month schedule from February to October 1962, with the animation team working 7 days a week to meet ABC's deadlines. The pressure created innovations born of pure desperation. Voice director Gordon Hunt made a crucial decision that separated the Jetsons from every other cartoon on television. He would cast experienced sitcom actors instead of traditional voice performers. George O'Hanlon, who voiced George Jetson, was a live-action character actor who had never done voice work before. Penny Singleton, who voiced Jane, was a movie star from the 1930s and 40s who had played Blondie in 28 films. These weren't cartoon voices. They were real people, speaking naturally, bringing sitcom timing and dramatic nuance to animation. O'Hanlon's performance as George is particularly revolutionary. He played the character as genuinely tired, a middle-aged man worn down by meaningless work and constant technological obsolescence. His readings of lines like, "Jane, stop this crazy thing," aren't broad cartoon panic. They're the exhausted frustration of a real person whose life has spun out of his control. This naturalistic approach was so unusual for 1962 animation that some critics initially complained that George didn't sound like a cartoon character. But the production was chaos. Writers were hired and fired constantly as the show struggled to find its tone. Some episodes leaned into dark satire, others were pure slapstick. The tonal inconsistency wasn't artistic choice, it was panic. Life after cancellation. The Jetsons ended its primetime run on March 17, 1963, with a quiet cancellation announcement that barely made the news. 24 episodes, less than a full season by 1960s standards, and then nothing. For 2 decades, the Jetsons existed only in syndication limbo, occasionally airing on local stations alongside other Hanna-Barbera properties, but never achieving the cultural saturation of the Flintstones. Most Americans who grew up in the 1960s and 70s barely remembered the show existed. Then, something strange happened. In 1985, 23 years after cancellation, The Jetsons became the highest-rated show on cable television. Reruns on USA Network, and later on Cartoon Network, introduced the show to a generation that had never seen the original broadcasts. Children of the 1980s grew up thinking The Jetsons was as prolific as the Flintstones, not realizing they were watching the same 24 episodes on endless repeat. The show's vision of the future, frozen in 1962's idea of 2062, became retro-futuristic, a nostalgia trip for a tomorrow that never arrived. The syndication success convinced Hanna-Barbera to produce new episodes in 1985. 41 additional episodes were created, bringing the total to 75, but these new installments faced an impossible challenge. How do you continue a show that was built on 1962's understanding of the future when it's now 1985? The new episodes updated the technology, added more contemporary references, but lost the original's satirical edge. They felt like generic sitcoms that happened to be set in space, missing the automation anxiety and existential dread that made the first 24 episodes subversive. The original 1962 footage continued to degrade. When the show was transferred to home video in the 1990s, the episodes were sourced from syndication masters that had already been cut and recut dozens of times. Different VHS and DVD releases featured slightly different edits. Some regional broadcasts had removed entire scenes. By the 2000s, tracking down the original broadcast versions became nearly impossible. The masters were either lost, destroyed, or buried so deep in Warner Brothers archives that even historians couldn't access them. Certain episodes became particularly rare. The Christmas episode, which featured religious content that was later deemed inappropriate for secular broadcasting, disappeared entirely from syndication for nearly 30 years. The future that never was. The Jetsons is more than just a canceled sitcom. It's a time capsule of an exact moment when America believed technology would solve everything, when the space race promised unlimited progress, when automation was going to liberate humanity rather than displace it. The show captured 1962's optimism about 2062, and in doing so, created a future that became immediately obsolete but paradoxically timeless. The fact that The Jetsons is more famous for its cancellation than its brief run is perhaps the show's greatest irony. It was designed to be the next Flintstones, to run for years, to become a cultural institution. Instead, it became the most influential one-season show in television history, a failure that succeeded by disappearing. If you discovered something new today, illuminate our day by clicking like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story from the annals of television history. Which other one-season wonders should we excavate next? Which shows died too young and took their secrets with them? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, keep the flicker alive.